Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. My name is Thielen. I'm the Managing Director of the Foundation, and today's topic is communication, resilience, and security. Security is one of the three core topics of the Adenauer Foundation, apart from innovation and representation. And communication is an increasingly important dimension of security policies which we want to focus on. We want to do this because communication, apart from military capabilities, apart from cultural attractiveness and economic and technological strength, are gaining more and more importance for the safeguarding of our values and our interests. We feel this topic deserves more attention. Of course, communication as a dimension of the security policy is not a new phenomenon, but it has acquired a new quality due to social media, characterized by the fact that more and more people use it as a central source of information. And due to the basic mechanics of these media that honor a certain virality, and the interaction and exaggeration are in contrast to the classical media, and also by new technologies that are used for the manipulation of communication. This is the media side of this trend, and the social development is an increasing polarization of the society, the migration crisis, the climate crisis, the pandemic. These are the buzzwords. These are crisis phenomena that act as a gateway for disinformation. If we say more attention, we at the same time have to establish that there are many spectacular cases of disinformation in recent years. We may remember the case Lisa earlier in 2016, or the debates about the US elections in 2016 and the French presidential elections of 2017. Or Alexei Navalny, and of course also we remember the debates all around COVID-19. A special case of disinformation as an instrument of hybrid warfare is the Ukraine. Since 2013 and 14, my colleague Brigitta Triebel, the head of our office in Kharkiv, will tell us more about it later on. All in all, we observe a major dynamism also beyond spectacular cases. The task force of the Foreign Service of the European Union has established that no country within the EU is affected as much as Germany. Over 700 cases since 2015 could be identified here. And we observe until the recent days more and more attention to this very topic, especially now. Journalists of the Federal Press Conference have announced publicly that they feel instrumentalized for disinformation in Germany. Of course, there are many initiatives, fact checks, new tools that also promise a certain credibility check, technical developments that are used for detecting fake news, and also activities in Germany and Europe, which oblige the platform providers more actively. The strategies are relatively simple, first and foremost, to bring more light into the darkness, to analyze, to raise attention to this topic, and to create attention for this topic, and to create publicity. Administrative and regulatory interventions have their limits. Not always it is evident what is a fake and what is a real news. In a free and liberal, open society, this is also the subject of the debate. We do need and rely on the pluralism of opinions and the freedom of opinions and a large variety of free opinions. Therefore, we need a strengthening of the trust in democratic institutions. This presupposes that these institutions are prepared to question themselves and to renew themselves again and again. And for an institution like the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, it is especially important that we need more work in order to improve the internal cohesion of our society. We believe that for today's topic, a window of opportunities is needed. A survey of the Munich Security Conference said that 64% of Germans are very much interested in foreign and security policy issues. 51% of the 18 to 30-year-olds are in favor of more commitment of Germany abroad. I leave it to you what the results looks like if you put more flesh to this question and when you ask for more concrete facts. But there's undoubtedly a greater attention for the international dimension of our security, our values and interests. It is our task as the foundation is to contribute to a strategy debate on security, which also includes the question of communication. That's what we are doing now with the presentation of my colleague from the Ukraine, with a keynote of Lieutenant General Markus Laubenthal, the Deputy General Inspector of the Bundeswehr. Thank you, General, for your preparedness. After his statement, he will discuss, together with Roderich Kiesewetter, member of the German Bundestag, on the question. He is also the Commissioner for Foreign Policy of the CDU-CS Parliamentary Group and the Parliamentary Control Body. And he is a friend of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for many years. Welcome, Mr. Kiesewetter. And we also have Mr. Knappenschneider, the Managing Director of Avisa Deutschland. Let me greet you with a virtual welcome. The moderator will be Professor Dr. Natascha Zowislo-Grünewald, Professor for Entrepreneurial Communication at the University of the Federal Army in Munich. She and her university is an institution we have cooperated with in an online series of seminars and also in the context of an anthology on this issue which will come out shortly, which will be about the different dimensions and facets of threats in the communication space and about strategic answers. Both is also true for the following contributions. We will begin with Mrs. Triebel and will continue with the keynote of the General, Mr. Laubenthal. Thank you for your attention. What does Russian disinformation mean in eastern Ukraine? The Ukraine is a pragmatic case of Russian disinformation. These campaigns are known since 2013. Since that time, the Ukraine is in favor of a rapprochement with the EU against the will of Russia. Recent weeks have shown that this tactics of Russia has hardly changed in recent years, because when the fighting at the contact line between the Ukrainian forces and the so-called separatists supported by Russia escalated again and escalated to massive battles, disinformation in and about the Ukraine increased. One example was published in early April. In the Ukraine news, we could read that a small boy was killed by a Ukrainian drone. That boy lived in a small town in the Donbas region that is no longer controlled by the Ukraine, in the so-called People's Republic of Donbas. This fake news was spread by a Russian news agency first, and then other Russian news agencies and internet pages used it, and then the Ukrainian websites and social media shared it. Especially Ukrainian websites that are to be categorized as pro-Russian websites here. This is a common case of disinformation in eastern Ukraine. The initiative Stop Fake could, however, expose this news as a fake news because the small boy was not killed by a drone of the Ukraine armed forces, but probably he was stepping on a landmine. This could be proven because the place where this incident happened was far too far away from the contact line. So the drones of the Ukraine forces could not reach that place because the airspace is controlled by the rebel forces. Other examples of recent weeks show in different areas it is tried to undermine the trust of the Ukrainian people in their own state. For example, by the end of March here, on internet pages in the Ukraine, it was announced that the drinking water situation is threatened. The biggest river in the Ukraine, the Dnieper River, is contaminated, they said, and no drinking water can be produced from the river. So therefore, the Ukraine would be confronted with a drinking water catastrophe. This is a news that was spread by a Russian agency, and then pro-Ukrainian internet web pages spread this news again. So these are narratives of Russian disinformation that can be read time and again. Especially, it is stressed that the Ukraine is the aggressor in this conflict, but it is also said that Ukraine is a failed state, doing nothing for its own population and cannot look after them as this drinking water situation was used for. But there are other disinformation cases, for example, that Ukraine is a fascist neo-nationalistic state that is trying to suppress the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine and is preparing a genocide with the help of the USA. With regard to Western allies of the Ukraine, it is said again and again that Ukraine is an externally controlled state with the help of the EU and the United States. And these fake news, these narratives are very effective in the Ukraine because the trust in the people's own state is weak. There are no public media that can present a counter report, especially in eastern Ukraine. People are still very close to the big neighbor. How does the Ukraine react to Russian disinformation? So far, no comprehensive strategy is discernible against this disinformation. Since 2014, the different Ukrainian leaders tried to defend the channels of distributing fake news. The former president Poroshenko started in 2014 to ban all Russian TV channels. 70 Russian TV channels are not permitted today. And web pages with a long range was also banned, like the Russian station V-Contact. The President Zelensky continued this policy, and in February this year, 3 Ukrainian TV stations were banned as pro-Russian stations that were close to the pro-Russian platform. The reason he gave was that this is a threat of national security because these stations have spread fake news time and again. The reaction of Ukrainian people are diverse. They demand that more should be done against Russian fake news on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a lot of criticism with regard to the way these measures are carried out, like the stop of transmission programs is always equated with censorship of these decisions. An important role in fighting disinformation is the civil society. Since 2014, there are various initiatives like Vox Chat that expose fake news and unmask them as fake news, and that also prepare studies on the channels of distribution and how these fake news work in the Ukraine. This is a country where no public sector stations exist, where the trust in the state is low. An important function of the civil society we can sum up that disinformation is a key element in the hybrid and military warfare of Russia in the Ukraine, and this will remain so. And therefore, it is worthwhile to pay more attention to Ukraine, because you can learn a lot about the way of going about the way of threats or counter strategies. But even 8 years after the beginning of major Russian campaigns of disinformation, little is known about the impact of these fake news. That means the extent of these fake news, how they influence the public opinion in the Ukraine, has to be examined in more detail. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Thielen, Professor Zowislo-Grünewald, Mr. Kiesewetter, Mr. Knappenschneider, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here with you to discuss this interesting topic with you. Hybrid warfare is the term we use since the annexation of the Crimea in the security debate very often. Communication and how we deal with information and the capability in the cyber space play an important role in the warfare today. In the case of NATO defense that has gained in importance since 2014, we also have to prepare ourselves for hybrid warfare attacks, and this involves also the question how we can become more resilient here. Because our opponents will, before they take military actions, will resort to cyber attacks and disinformation in order to obtain the sovereignty of interpretation, to undermine our liberal democracy, and to decrease our combat readiness and to put pressure on our alliance. By covert attacks, the early exposure of hybrid campaigns is made more difficult, and to blur the line between military and non-military actions. Hybrid attacks are aimed at the gray zone between the responsibilities of departments and authorities, because here we suspect weak points so that hybrid attacks can be launched, so a good coordination between the departments and the responsible authorities is needed. The defense of these attacks is a comprehensive mission of the entire state. Therefore, the federal government makes a contribution to the defense of hybrid attacks. Reversely, the federal army acts also as a player to thwart hybrid attacks and to avoid disinformation. How do disinformation, what the mechanisms make us more resilient here? Let me first of all go back one step. Information and communication play an important role for the military in war times ever since. 200 years ago, Clausewitz said about the importance of this factor. He said that the biggest part of news in wartime is uncertain, contradictory, or wrong. He called this the mist of the war. I'm convinced that this is still true today. Despite novel technologies or satellites, real-time transmission and international intelligent algorithms of data processing, because it depends on humans what they make out of the information or news. So it depends on what he understands, what he believes, and how he communicates or interprets the information, and what the decision may take on this basis. Today, as 200 years ago, and probably much more longer ago, one's actions need to be legitimized, or others or the opponent's action is to be discredited, or to avoid something. For example, the reason of the war has to be legitimized, the need for a war has to be explained, or an influence has to be taken with regard to other states, but also with regard to one's own population. For this reason, wrong information, fake news were used. Many examples from history show that the public opinion and the sovereignty of interpretation has always been irrelevant. Fake news, disinformation have been around for a much longer time than we suspect today. The spread of information, the ways of communication, and the influence you can achieve have changed dramatically in recent years. The technical progress has made communication different. In the past decade, the information and communication space, due to social media and the smartphone, has changed radically. It has become wider and more structured and small-scale. Today, for many people, it is not the official TV station or a daily they use as a source of information. Many people use social media today, or their smartphone they have with them any time, so they can address anyone directly, as the Chinese example shows. They can also exercise control. Today, in social media, you will be shown only what you might be interested in, or what your friends might be interested in. So in an undisturbed atmosphere, you can dwell in your own bubble of information, or if you do not have the necessary media competence, you will end up in an information bladder you would not perceive as a bladder of information. Therefore, democratic societies must not only get prepared technically against such attacks day after day. As an individual, we also have to train ourselves to expose propaganda as propaganda, to reveal these patterns and to obtain information from various sources. The fact that this is basically possible is the advantage of our information society. If you want to obtain information, you can do it in a most diverse form, and not as 30 years ago in the local newspaper. At least in the Western society, this is possible. However, you have to know when an information is true and that the source of this news is reliable. This is a challenge of information and communication in a democracy This also applies to armed forces. 150 years ago, one reaction to wrong information or missing information or long transmission, especially in the German armed forces, the mission-type tactics developed. We develop within a corridor of action to act on the basis of our own responsibility. But this presupposes that subordinates are trained to develop their independent thinking and action. One principle that has remained true in the Bundeswehr and which we are proud of until today, and that can also be seen successfully in non-military areas like in the pandemic. We know much better what is possible in the like me in the Ministry of Defense. We provide a corridor, and you will have to decide yourself what's to be done. Mission-type tactics will therefore make a major contribution to the German armed forces' resilience. Mission-type tactics requires trust. The commander has to make sure that the subordinates understand the order in the interest of the entire plan. This plan must be systemically established because the soldier has to know what is expected of him in the framework of mission-type tactics. The soldier is used to question certain orders before acting. Mission-type tactics makes it hard to influence an opponent. The internal command means that the subordinate fulfills his order because he has understood it. He has to debate with us the meaning and the reason of this order so that he or she is prepared to risk one's life if necessary. A soldier that has done so will understand why he defends the freedom of Germany. This soldier will develop a certain resilience against fake news and disinformation. Another level of communication must be discussed at the level of the NATO. Deterrence is important again. It will only work if the will and the preparedness of an armed forces are understood. All measures to deter and to defend the alliance show the will of collective defense of the alliance area. And it also shows that the cohesion of the alliance as the center of gravity is still unharmed. But the potential opponent must also know that we have the capability, that our communication is what we can put into practice. That means that our forces can be relocated quickly for action. For this, we need a Bundeswehr that has the necessary equipment. With regard to the national defense, we have done a lot in recent years. We have improved our readiness, our combat readiness. We have improved our equipment and will continue to do so. We have also prepared a reserve concept and strengthened our defense structures. So in recent years, we have achieved quite a lot. I'm convinced that resilience can be achieved in the Bundeswehr by a better combat readiness and commitment, and therefore resilience starts in our people, in the people. There's a new threat situation that cannot be compared with conventional threat scenarios. This threat is unconcrete, hardly compressible, but it is permanently present. It is a consequence of our multipolar, digitalized and networked world order. This threat is created by bits and bytes, which has a damage potential on the basis of propaganda, disinformation and fake news. The credibility not only of enterprises and public institutions is undermined, but also the trust in our liberal democratic social order. Offensive or latent, intentionally or not, if the society has nothing to put against it, if it is not resilient, it is fatal. The security of one's own conviction will become brittle. The war of narratives, the fight about the sovereignty of interpretation has started fully. Welcome to the debate on communication, resilience and security of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung and the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich. I'd like to talk with my guests today about the chances and risks in the information space, about whether we have lost ground, about the dimension of the threat and the task before us, about communication as a strategic asset. In short, about the question how a weakness can be turned into a strength and how the defense of our democracy, especially in the digital information space, can be secured. I'd like to welcome Markus Laubenthal, the Deputy General of the General Inspector of the Bundeswehr, who says that the information space has always played an important role 200 years ago due to technical progress, social media and so on. It becomes more and more complex. The protection against this starts in the people's ahead. I also would like to welcome Mr. Roderich Kiesewetter, member of the Deutsche Bundestag and Commissioner for the Foreign Policy of the CDU-SU Parliamentary Group. He says we cannot afford the strict separation between internal and external security because of hybrid attacks. We need a stronger network approach, informal exchange, a rapid exchange, and a narrative in the digital area. Last but not least, we would like to welcome Holger Knappenschneider, an expert in strategic communication. He says the advent of social media can be compared to the translation of the Bible. The contents are no longer controlled by an elite, but everyone can interpret certain parts for him or herself. This is a threat, but it cannot be made undone. Welcome to this panel. Let me start with the first question right away. Can we still talk about our public opinion? Does it still belong to us? Mr. Kiesewetter. I believe this is an interesting competition, but nevertheless, there are basic truths based on education, the values of enlightenment, and in a certain trust in what we call the canon of education. We see, with regard to COVID especially, and the debate around Navalny in the run-up to the federal election, how much it is tested how our society responds to fake news. I can observe how thousands of mails that we receive are influencing our political action by a more concentrated action, by an attempt with the help of the Federal Ministry of Health or parliamentarian activities or work in the press to influence the information space by means of facts. Mr. Laubenthal said it before. We are in a competition that is running the risk to become indifferent, so that supposedly everyone is right, and the opponents of free opinion use this. They say everything is of the same value. This troubles me. Therefore, education means a lot, is important, but also clear action have to be taken against fake news. What players do you mean? You said that there are many sources trying to influence influence us, or is that a diffuse situation? Well, I do not criticize citizens writing letters to us. I criticize them about the way they obtain information. At the beginning, the origin of the virus was criticized. They said it comes from a Chinese lab, or it is a cultivation from a lab. But now the vaccination policy of the country is criticized or undermined. This is a constant action we have to continue. Let me use China's action with the World Health Organization, or Trump's activities with the World Health Organization, how Russia Today or Sputnik and a party that's represented in the Bundestag use fake news until they are refuted, or until the person spreading this news is contracting COVID himself, especially in the party that denied the disease. Mr. Knappenschneider, you deal also with fake news, disinformation in the internet. Can you give me a magnitude, a dimension? How often does it happen, and with regard to which topics? Well, we can give a quantification of current topics being discussed and where the threats lie. The problem is, more or less, that we more or less react instead of acting. We have to understand what topics are discussed here. What Mr. Laubenthal said, the population has to understand why do we do all this in order to build up trust. The issue of public opinion has been emotionalized by the social media. There are lots of citizens, 80% of the citizens listen or watch the official TV news, but we tend to forget that there is perhaps a growing part of the population not using this source of information, that prefer an emotional level and singular topics they are interested in. You have just mentioned groups that are especially susceptible here. What would you say? What increases the vulnerability of groups, of individuals? Who is receptible? And why do we no longer reach these people with what we believe is true? Well, these are people who do not feel understood, or who are inclined to follow somebody who serves them with their interests. So conjunctions are made with topics we discuss and the things that have nothing to do with this. One fake news group deals with one given topic. The society is not serviced like that. And this person, however, feels to be understood and follows that group into a different direction of topics, whereas an educated person does not understand how this could have become possible. And this is emotion-driven. Here we have to start from in order to win back these people by means of training and enlightenment, and to protect them against conmen and swindlers. You said this topic is not that important. Perhaps gateways are opened where cognitive dissonance exists, where we could come in and where it is tried to fish these people. Mr. Laubenthal, what about influence from abroad? Are there any data And how do we deal with that? I think generally authoritarian systems find it more easy to spread this disinformation in liberal societies because of our diversity of opinions and because of the technical means made available. So here we have more open channels to discredit values, to spread lies, and to undermine the combat preparedness or to discredit MPs. I think this is one strategy. We in a Western democracy have to understand this. We have to develop the awareness to protect ourselves against these attacks. As you have just said, democracies basically are way weaker to ward off these attacks than authoritarian regimes. Is this really a weakness? And if so, what do we do against it? I think it is not a weakness. It is just more effortsome. In a dictatorship, like in Russia, the government media believe to have a certain sovereignty. But every weekend, hundreds of thousands of people take to the street for the freedom of Navalny. But it also acts like a valve against pressure. We also have demonstrations in this country, but this is in the framework of free opinions and in the framework of laws, so that even wrong claims can coexist with true facts. And here I do see a necessity by the state to explain why and for what reasons certain things are done. But there is one TV program, Hard and Fair, that explains these things. I think it is the responsibility of media in the net to explain, not in the network of Funke Media Group or others, but in the interest of real facts. I think it is a very important point to expose these things, but I also expect the citizens to obtain information from more and wider sources. If you live in an information bladder, you will be further serviced. Cambridge Analytics, in the first election campaign of Trump, there were 4 basic types: the fearsome, the angry, the concerned person, who were then serviced, and in their aggression, in their concern, they were confirmed. And social media like Facebook has therefore an additional responsibility. I think it is the responsibility of the state and the parliaments to tell such companies not only to pay a tax in the states where they work, but also to remember them that they are not only platforms, but that they also represent values. I think the population asks for a value orientation, and we should not, these values should not remain indifferent, but at least the UN Charter should be the criterion here. We have learned that threats can be massive, or at least we have the fear that the threat can be massive. How can we confront this totality? We said that Facebook has an entrepreneurial responsibility to act in the interest of the society. You spoke about the parliament. We have a representative of the defense ministry here. Who do I have to approach if I wanted to talk to the competent person? We are confronted with a cacophony of responsibilities and a vague situation. Who do I have to contact by phone if I wanted to reach the person who's responsible for controlling the information threats? Well, there is not the one boss. I think it is the task of the entire state. As Mr. Kiesewetter said, The Parliament has to give out regulations. Every institution, every civil organization has to make preparations, and a certain speed is also needed. Disinformation cannot be thwarted off by technical means, but information must be made available in a better quality so that the citizens can obtain information quickly and can decide for oneself what's right and what's wrong. Well, all this sounds as if there are plenty of players who want the good things, so they are expected to become active. But what will happen if they do not resort to concerted actions? Do we not need more systematic cooperation? I think of the cyber problem here. Here we also have a national anti-cyber program. So don't you think this has become necessary for a long time? I would refer to the motion of the FDP initiating a task force. I think this is a good sensibilization because we also were confronted with hacks during previous election campaigns, but we also need a crisis task force to act as a coordinator. We have anti-terror centers, and we have this in case of extremist threats. Mr. Kiesewetter and Mr. Laubenthal said it before. I think a coordinated action, if we had it, could be done by a security council in the federal authorities. But I do see, as Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer also said in her speeches in Hamburg and Munich 1 and 2 years ago, that the Federal Security Council is needed and that in times of actions against pandemics and how do we work in the EU, I think we should not leave all this to the news agencies, nor is it the task of a propaganda ministry or an information ministry. This is a task for the entire society. Once such a threat is recognized, we need these services that can act as an interceptor. Do you have perhaps the impression, Mr. Knappenschneider, are there any ideas as to what could be done so that the threat from the information space is taken seriously enough? If we think of the video clip from the Ukraine, the Kremlin now uses a military doctrine that controls everything and also conventional forces. Meanwhile, Western theoreticians and practitioners say that wars in the future are won or lost in the cyberspace. Do you have the impression that this topic is taken seriously enough? Well, you can never take this topic seriously enough. I believe the corona pandemic and the influence of social media have made it very clear to us that speedy actions are needed. And it's not only the Facebooks you can identify. There are many groups that are very dynamic, that are not regulated, and to which we have no access to. When they are closed groups, you can perhaps monitor them by technical means. But we want to see ourselves as a pluralistic society, and we do not want to meddle into the process of opinion formation, claiming we have a better opinion. But we have to train the people more critically. We have to make them recognize that they are manipulated. And the regulation of big Facebooks and you name them are included here. But it's just too short-sighted. we have different spaces of information. There's not the only information space. Every group, every institution has its own information space it has to protect. And there are also governmental players in Asia where the economic policy is part of the reasons of state. And they are also trying to use and influence companies for their own purpose. So therefore, we need a coordinating center where every institution can identify a threat in order to take concerted actions. But there will never be one institution as such. This Goebbels ministry is what we do not want specifically. And this is not even necessary. What we do need much more is an active defense of our own values. I think this is what we should be the thing to remember as a state and as the society. We should be proactive to defend what is close to us and what is necessary as the values of our society. So here we have to create more understanding, and that has to be done in a more coordinated fashion. And in addition, we have become more active because the threat is known. Solutions are also existing. What is missing is the understanding for the urgency, that it is 5 to 12, and that an avalanche has to be started at the beginning and not when it is rolling down the hill. So the creation of credibility and trust, especially among those groups who may have lost it, who sit in their echo chambers, to bring them back into our world of thinking, is one of the core tasks where coordination is needed or where a strategy is needed. Do you have the impression that the players and the political institutions use and have understood the mechanisms of explanation and awareness raising, or do we have the impression that people are longing for the analog world to come back and to believe that people will resort to the newspaper news again? Do you think that the relevance of the digital debate has been understood by everyone? Can they use these mechanisms? What is your impression? I think we are all of a generation where the internet was far away. We are learning how it works. I have the impression that most of the players have stood still at 2.2. That you just have to click on what you want to read, and social media do not work like this anymore. This is the classical pull function of the past. You were thankful that you could get your article in the internet. Social media today work as a push function. You will simply be delivered things delivered to you, and you have to understand that the public opinion, that the society, at least partly, does not understand that you have to double-check something. They understand what they are being delivered. And here we are very bad at this. Here we leave things to those who damage trust, who attack our fundamental structures. We leave the field to them by discussing emotions delivered to them, to an unspecific group, and then this snowball effect is initiated. We are still too inactive. This may work with 80% of the people who want to be informed. But what troubles me is that 20 to 40% is not reached by us anymore, because they fail to understand why they should do things when they are receiving 150 news on their mobile phone they are interested in. However, these are facts which are not, these are news which are not based on facts. So you say the people in the echo chambers have to be brought back. We have to find out ways to do so, and this is also possible. These echo chambers fulfill a certain function of social cohesion, which we might miss anywhere elsewhere. However, this sounds as if something bad is happening. Filter bubbles are created, and we have to try to defend ourselves against that. But that's too late then, so our actions is following. But what about early recognition? Can we do something before things happen? What do we know about the network? Are there indicators about vulnerable groups, about topics that are getting hot, that are used as gateways in order to pull more people into these echo chambers, what we do not want. So what can we do to become more resilient? And one more question. Are we first strike capable? Well, let me start with your last question. I think we don't have to be first strike capable. I think we need a certain credibility. This is certainly something we have to build up and what you have to earn. When you then give away information, you have a good chance of credibility. Then you have just be speed enough. What you are mentioning is the point that we are not taking the initiative. We simply react to something, then acting. Then it depends on the speed we react. And the question is who reacts. I have to say that the Bundeswehr, especially in the pandemic, the Bundeswehr is offering a lot of contributions in this pandemic. This creates a lot of credibility as a state institution. This can encourage people to build trust, and then this disinformation that was spread is compared with the facts people see. It is a good way to convince people. However, it is always more difficult to bring back these people from such echo chambers, since they are influenced in their closed chat rooms. That is much more difficult. I think the credibility must be built up so that certain influences can be used. But we have to be objective. I've learned you have to be the first to be true. So what you do has to be credible in order to convince others. Well, this credibility, as we heard repeatedly, is important. And probably in some groups we have lost this credibility, and probably the number of people is increasing here. My first question is, how did this happen? And secondly, what are the rules? How can credibility be restored in the internet? What can I do exactly? Do I have to use retweets or likes? Do I have to infiltrate myself into these echo chambers? Of course, I exaggerate, but what can I do in the digital space? I think what happens in real life will convince the people. When things improve with regard to vaccination against COVID, things will get all right again. When the broadband connections are improved, when the situations at schools improve, then things will get better again. So I am quite optimistic. On the other hand, when we see how the Bundestag prepares employment applications, the demand for social media managers is going up. So it's not about the contents, but the question, how do I mediate what the people, what the citizens might be interested in? When we talk to young people who do not Facebook, but TikTok or Instagram, they are at home and wait, as we have heard, they wait for the push information and look what is available in the net. And then they see, well, the MPs just show pictures shaking hands. What they are interested in are reels, 30 seconds of statements, perhaps, nothing to read, but a clear statement, and maybe a reference to more facts. We who grew up without the internet believe that the people resort to a newspaper. The young people trust what they see in the net. So, I think as the state or as an institution, but as an MP and a university, as an educational institution, we need a different internet presence for the younger generation. We must not condemn them, we must not tell them to read, because they simply wouldn't. We simply have to explain or have to use credible, short statements. The second aspect on your first question, bringing back people is not the point, but to be relaxed enough to be able to convince people and not to build up counter-narratives. I think you have to be able to get in front of the power curve. Let's take the example of Mali or Libya or the European Green Deal, the countries that are trying to use coal or natural gas, or how Bosnia-Herzegovina or Libya, who are using these mineral resources. We must make sure that these countries are not getting lost to China or Russia. We have to explain to them, well, decarbonization is good, but we need you for the next years to come so that we can achieve something together with the EU. So these are practical examples. The young people are interested in how we are dealing with these challenges. The climate change is of everybody's concern, but the bicycle cannot be the only means of transport in the future. Technology must remain a good neighbor, and other people see how we act. When Germany is decarbonizing its economy, other people or other nations might believe that we are not competitive anymore. So we have to start up with a reasonable hydrogen strategy, or a reasonable electricity policy must be addressed so as not to leave it to our opponents. So here I wish more risk preparedness. Of course, I cannot prescribe every detail. I think we have then conquered these positions and would not defend certain subordinated subjects. So we will not be proactive. So you say the state has to deliver what it has to deliver, satisfaction, and you have to talk about these problems before the wave overwhelms us, even if there are people doubting all this. And secondly, you have to do it, and you have to communicate it within perhaps 30 seconds so that people like it. Well, Mr. Knappenschneider, you know how enterprises deal with these challenges to protect their own brand and to act before the wave attacks us. And what do you know about the sovereignty of interpretation? Can this be translated to the policy and the society? Or my question again, how can I make trust possible? What button do I have to press? What makes the difference? Well, we have to say, unfortunately, has not gone much farther than politics. We are still at the beginning to understand what we have to do and what form of information we want to control. We are all tweeting, they have websites, the companies are trying all this. But then if one minor thing may happen that nobody has foreseen, and then a shitstorm happens about a minor issue, and so this company is made the bad guy. What companies do is they prepare for possible scenarios. It is quite possible to say, well, we build a pipeline. What are the possible scenarios? What may go wrong? And who might have something against it? Who might instrumentalize this? And how can we manage in a run-up information so that the answers are given, that you can start right away without thinking for too long, and how you can anticipate what will happen or what can happen. Many reactions in the net are foreseeable. It is, however, a much more complex issue. We have to modernize our activities that have to become cooler and faster, so that we can appeal to the people, and perhaps we have to say that the state has to communicate good things in a cooler way. I think most things in Germany are explained in a rather dull way. We are spoiled, and therefore you concentrate perhaps on the three last minor things that do not function. I think this is typical for us, the Germans, but that is what the social media use, or what other countries or what opponents abuse to say, well, the state failed. Everything what we do in a positive way is not communicated. So perhaps we have to become more proactive. We have to advertise our good things so that everything is understood, and that that you do not only find what might have gone better, but that you also find a long list of successes. But the challenge to the companies is the same. They have not yet found a real answer how to cope with the situation of threat. Here a lot of work remains to be done. Maybe another reason is that the state is not allowed to do everything, or should not do everything. Let me remind you of the SEOs. Are policymakers allowed to do this? Are we allowed to think along this line, or is that a taboo? I think it is, of course, it is right to think about this, but I think it is wrong that MPs and some parties do not organize press talks anymore, but issue statements only, and put them in the net without the possibility of asking questions. This threatens the communication and the critical assessment. I think our policy should confront the critical assessment and should not remain in its own bubble, or should not run the risk of handing out propaganda. Well, there is a party TV in times of party elections or parliamentary elections, in the debates in the parliament and in the public, the people will recognize soon when a one-sided information is done. Nobody would talk about the advantages of an IQS or AC8 But what the description of political work is concerned, also at state level or of European level, has to expose the debate instead of a one-sided statement. I think this is a model instrument of a liberal democracy. I think here the federal election will offer an opportunity to test all these things for a democratic activities or facts. What do we have to expect in the election period? What threat scenarios will we have to expect? And if there are scenarios, how are we prepared for them? Do we have something in our sleeve, or do we wait what will happen and will decide when it happens? I think for the Federal Army, in the mission areas, it will be important to observe who's acting there, because things will always develop everywhere at any time that are used against us, also in times of elections especially. You mentioned the issue of early recognition of crises. This is also part of our planning. We have to know who might move in that area. This is a global issue, but we know the kind of interests that exist in our command structures, and then we need an effective press apparatus to counter these activities, like the entrepreneurial homepage. We have to get prepared for this and to prepare this profile time and again in order to offer objective information. I can offer an example from my work of domestic activities. We received a lot of complaints against aircraft noise. Of course, a helicopter cannot reduce its noise. What did we do? We landed, we went down and explained to the people why we have to fly. It was a training program for Afghanistan. We had to land on areas which are difficult terrains in order to fly out injured people. That's what we did. So we confronted the people with these home stories, and at least the people in that area or the protesters could be convinced. At least we achieved a high level of credibility. Of course, they weren't happy with the final result, but they at least understood why we are doing this. So the number of complaints and phone calls went down. You cannot simply say, well, this won't change anything, but you have to ask for the people's understanding and attention. That's what you have to do with home stories as the ones who are responsible, but that's what also has to be done by the pilots to explain to the people. I have to do it during the night because I have to test my night vision devices. So authenticity is an important key word here, and to communicate with the people clearly why you have to do what you are doing and not to step back. Mr. Kiesewetter, what do you expect in the election campaign? How do you prepare yourself? We have heard about attacks against internet pages, email, mailboxes. How do you prepare? Well, we know that there have been hacks against MPs where email accounts were entered. So in the press we could read that 7 MPs. The 2018 hack was more massive. But we have to expect that this happens again and again. We need a strengthening of the cyberspace in the Bundestag. And then in my constituency, I believe that presence on site is important, be it doorstep talks or phone talks or meetings. The market square is an important instrument in order to give answers to the people's questions. We have to get prepared against general discreditation, claiming that the mask selling scandal was viral. I think disinformation will have to be expected with regard to our foreign missions or with regard to international obligations of the Federal Republic, trying to claim that we want to secure raw materials. Of course, we have to understand that free trade routes have to be protected. Arms exports will be another issue. Of course, areas of crises are not to be excluded, because in these areas we wanted to work for more stability, and we want to support some and not others. Therefore, we have to say clearly what our interests are. Sometimes we pretend as if we want to please everyone. We are much more or much weaker if we do not commend our actions. In the run-up to the elections, I think it is important that the MPs and also the party committees report to a task force on what they are experiencing, like the FDP has done, in order to understand what happens rather than counter-propaganda. And then I'd like to mention two other things that are important to me. Our services should be better prepared in the field of cyber defense and the recognition of disinformation, or I should like to call it recognition of subversion. What happens in a society when fake news is repeated and again, and that the reliability and trustworthiness is undermined time and again. So we have to explain what subversion can do. And the other thing is, ask me what the country is doing for you, but ask me what you can do for the country. So the Federal Army is now launching its program Year for Germany. If we offer a better program for young people, it's not a compulsory service, because we also have to deal with objectors. 300 or 4,000 people, young people, would be ready to do a service period every year. That would make people more resilient against temptations of fake news. I think that would be something the state should be used more courageously and more actively. So you say the analog world remains important. I have to remain in contact. I should not leave it to the internet to form opinions. But you also say what we are lacking is the explanation to know what actually happens, how disintegrating is this, and when the database is missing, when we are in the dark and have no idea about the facts. And for this, we need a coordinated function in this state. Last question to each of you. Let me start with Mr. Knappenschneider. If we are partly to blame and responsible for the loss or for regaining the trust of the state, if we had a wish, we talked about institutionalization and individual responsibility and educational policy and the analog versus the digital world, what would you wish? What should be done? What should be your program? What should be done now? Well, we have to be more honest. I think, have taken the issue of credibility as a given. I think an information form has developed which we have no influence on, or little, if any. So we allowed things to happen too much. We remained inactive for too long. People who do not obtain information from central sources do not learn anything about this discourse at all. Trump or CNN reported about Trump, but the followers of Trump do not read these papers. Our challenge, therefore, is how can we regain credibility among a group of people who are not obtaining information from traditional sources. And here we have good things to start from and have to be honest that more needs to be done. Otherwise, we will really be guilty. Mr. Laubenthal, what would you wish? What should happen now? A short statement, if I could ask you. Well, for the Bundeswehr, I could say that we have to talk at all levels. Credibility, whether credibility has been won at all levels. I should say, whenever we get an invitation, we should accept it. We should not hide away. We should trust young people if they say, okay, we want to know something from the pilot. We have to trust that they talk. And even if it fails, we should be relaxed enough to bear this, and to tolerate this. I think these people can do much more with the things that failed, where they create credibility. That convinces people more. Hiding away anonymous communication by home pages alone and pictures alone is the wrong way to go. I think we have to use any means and all forms to accept these opportunities and to take the challenge. So this also refers to the strength of one's own institution, where we should become bolder. Mr. Kiesewetter, what's your program? What should be done now? Should we install a National Council of Information? Do we use a different form of coordination? No, we should avoid the impression that we are now starting a kind of blind actionism. I think the 16 federal states and the competence of the cultural ministers, a national plan of education and media competence should be hammered out. This is an aspect which has to be mentioned and underlined for training the people and for education, in order to distinguish which is wrong and which is right. The second aspect, as the Federal Office for Information Security Act, in order to discover viruses, internet viruses, we need an agency, I call it agency, an agency that addresses fake news in the case of subversive fake news. But I also would suggest a certain kind of relaxedness. I think we should accept this challenge. This is the development of the next years to come. We cannot stop it. We have to accept it, and we have to take part in its shaping. This means to be present in this space and to be courageous enough to address these people, to say this is wrong and this is right, and that is what I defend. So we should be clear enough about our opinion. I think the image of Germany works abroad. We have political foundations that contribute to a stronger resilience. And we have the Deutsche Welle station that was underfunded for years, and they gave up certain programs. I think in these countries where a lot of cyber attacks come from, not only China and Russia, here we have to show more actively what the advantages and disadvantages of liberal democracy are. And we should also openly discuss errors. We should develop an error culture, a culture on what succeeded and what failed. So it's not about making things better than they are, but to admit mistakes and errors we have made as well. And then we will be in a good position, and we should trust the young generation to be able to carry on what we have started. Well, if we remember what we cannot offer, what young people can do today, that education will also help. So if we remember these things, I am not afraid of the future. I think we have learned a lot of things today. Thank you to all of you, Mr. Laubenthal, Mr. Kiesewetter and Mr. Knappenschneider. Thank you for your open-minded and vivid discussion. The scenario of threat of fake news, disinformation and propaganda is obvious, and the examples are in rule. State organizations will not be able to turn away from the communication space and to give it enough attention in the near future. And today, the big strength of our democracy, the freedom of the spoken word, is at the same time a big weakness as well, because not everyone obeys to the rules when negotiating facts or truths. Here, a lot more remains to be done in order to distinguish the difference between disinformation and information. I think we should not rely on the fact that the good things, beautiful things will triumph because we, in contrast to the others, have the better arguments. This would not do justice to the challenges of a defensive democracy in the 21st century. A value-based defensive democracy needs a value-based defensive strategic communication. And here we should always think of this. Thank you for your attention at home. Thank you for having listened to us. I hope you enjoyed it. And please remember, we are part of the debate space. Let us use our power wisely. It's the power of Parabellum. If you want peace, you have to be prepared for it. That also applies to the space of debates.